Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge. Hey everyone, Katie Crane from the Pilates Professional. Welcome to another episode of the Pilates Lounge Podcast. Now, on today's episode, it's really about wrapping up this series that we've just done on fibromyalgia. I don't know about you, but I found it so fascinating and educational, but also enlightening to speak to people who specifically are living or have lived with fibromyalgia. If you have not listened to all of those episodes, please go back and listen to them. Now, I interviewed a Pilates practitioner, educator, Carla Mullins from Body Organics. She works with fibromyalgia, but we all know Carla, or you probably know Carla because of her educational work. She's very good at getting creative while helping people to understand the mechanics behind what's happening in the body when we're doing Pilates. So check out that episode. But then I also had the pleasure of having conversations with people who live with fibromyalgia or have completely healed themselves. So I spoke to Rianne from the UK. She had lived with Pilates, had lived with fibromyalgia, and through her own exploration has completely healed herself, and now she works serving other people to help them heal their body. I also spoke to Lourdes, and she is in El Salvador. She's a Pilates instructor as well. She has fibromyalgia and has taught herself how to manage her current symptoms with Pilates. So that was a great episode. And then, of course, I spoke to um, Kristen Windsor, who also did have fibromyalgia, along with a host of many, many other health conditions, and she has completely healed herself and today is truly living her best life. What I found quite fascinating about speaking with those people in particular who are living with or have lived with fibro was that there was some very intertwining flavors within those conversations. So I just want to pull that apart a little bit and, and see what you think, I suppose. So one thing that I really noticed was that each person who suffered from fibromyalgia had all lived through a very traumatic event or a very long, stressful period in their life. But each of those people were able to pinpoint a very traumatic period or a very traumatic event in their life, which they now believe led to them ending up with fibromyalgia. And then the other common thread was that the fact that they all recognized that, they saw that event or that um, or that series of events, they pinpointed it, and then they healed from that. That was definitely a big part of them healing from the fibromyalgia. They all recognized that fibromyalgia was very much tied to their emotional self, to their to the feelings that they had about themselves, and to the environment that they were living in. And I think that these are super important takeaways. That when we're working with people with fibromyalgia, the body doesn't just end up in chronic pain. It's not an overnight experience. And so it's not an overnight if it's not an overnight experience to end up with fibromyalgia, it's certainly not going to be an overnight fix either. B, Pilates is never going to be the fix for fibromyalgia, but the role that Pilates can play in supporting somebody as they're healing or while they're living with fibromyalgia is absolutely key. So, as far as Pilates is concerned, some things that we want to consider when we're working with fibromyalgia, and Carla definitely talked about this a little bit in her session when we played around with some of the Pilates equipment. And if you haven't watched it on YouTube, you can go onto our YouTube channel now and check out any of our podcasts. But she talks about unloading the joints. So she uses traction by using springs and slings to unload joints to take away perceived pressure or pressure in the joints to help unwind that fight or flight response. Now, definitely both Kristen and Rianne talked about the fight or flight response. We do have another episode, or a couple of episodes actually, on polyvagal theory and vagus nerve regulation. So if you have not yet listened to them, they're back in a few seasons, but they're definitely relevant to this topic of fibromyalgia. So go back and listen to those sessions if you don't understand polyvagal theory or vagus nerve. But ultimately, the idea is that fibromyalgia, because it is set off from a traumatic event or a series of traumatic events, the body is in a heightened state of stress and the body has not released that stress. So because the body is holding on to that trauma, the person ends up with chronic pain, chronic fatigue, joint pain, depression, all the things that go with fibromyalgia. Now, definitely, all of the guests confirmed that their depression was married to the pain. So if you've ever experienced pain, it gets you down. If you've ever experienced pain for a long period of time, it really gets you down. So it's a double-sided coin. You feel depressed because you're in pain, but you're also in pain because you feel depressed. So when you don't have energy, so you might not even have the pain symptoms, but you don't have the energy, you don't feel like getting out of bed, you don't want to be around people, that can be part of the pain experience. But also, obviously, if you're in pain all the time, it's debilitating psychologically. They all confirmed that. And they all confirmed that part of their healing was movement. So movement felt good. Rianne talked about she loved going out in nature. She loved grounding. She loved walking out in nature. She loved touching nature. That was her way of experiencing movement, but also connecting. She specifically talked about grounding and the benefits that that had of her, for her. And then both Kristen and Lourdes talked about the importance of movement for them. I mean, Lourdes is a Pilates instructor, so she finds that Pilates is her go-to. But she did also specifically say that she finds that the mat work is particularly useful for her because it helps her really, similar to Rianne, it really helped her ground herself, find that grounding because there was no other distractions of the equipment being involved. So when she's on the mat, she can really come into her center. She can be very aware of where her body is in space. And once she gets that, and this is what she teaches as well, once she really taps into that inner feeling of being in yourself, being aware of how you're feeling, then she adds props on, but she prefers that over the equipment. And that lends to what Carla was talking about, which is we don't have to excessively load. In fact, excessively loading with somebody with fibromyalgia can actually make the condition worse because it's going to make them more fatigued. They're already experiencing pain and it hurts to move full stop for some people, depending on at what stage they're at. But although movement is key, it needs to be super gentle movement. So if we're going to load up, we're loading up in on the equipment in a way that is actually supporting the joints, supporting the muscles, and helping the body move easier and better rather than loading up for them to feel their muscles working so much. This is a very, very important thing to think about. Not that you can never do loaded work. When I'm working with fibromyalgia, until I know that the person is very good at listening to their own body and able to give me that feedback as to what they need, well, they're just learning Pilates and it's a bit of a learning curve. I'm not loading up for them to get muscle fatigue. I'm loading up for them to learn the repertoire and learn how to move well. And then as they get better at being able to give me feedback as to how they felt the next day and make sure that it was definitely the Pilates that made them feel that, and it wasn't going out into the garden for 2 hours afterwards that was the real burnout, those types of things, right? So the person has gotten very good at giving me solid feedback on how their Pilates uh, has made them feel in the couple of days later, and then we can start to load up, but it's never super heavy. We're never getting real heavy load on people with fibromyalgia until and unless they do get to the point like Kristen in particular, who now she's doing a heavy load at the gym. She's rock climbing. She's doing some really dynamic things. Fantastic. But she also said that she continues to listen to her body. And this also was a very clear thread that went through each of the people, was that this was a big part of their learning. They were all high achievers. So they all had a traumatic event that happened to them. They were all high achievers. They all had very high expectations of themselves. They were all very harsh on themselves. They all didn't feel good enough, and they all lived in a stressful environment. And then to flip that switch of that, so then that ends up fibromyalgia. To flip that switch, they had to learn to listen to their body's needs. They had to make sure they were getting ample sleep. They had to make sure that they understood how to use relaxation techniques. So whether it was breath work or meditation, uh, they really had to learn to listen to their body's whispers, because fibromyalgia ultimately is your body yelling at you after you haven't listened to the whispers for a long, long time, because we're very good at repressing things. We're very good at not listening to things, but these people who have healed themselves or who are managing fibromyalgia successfully have learned to put themselves first, and that's a very difficult thing to do these days. We are taught that we've got to put everybody else first. If you're a mother, a business owner, a worker, a husband, a wife, we are taught to put other people before ourselves because that's the better thing to do if you want to be a good person. And if you really want to be a good person, then you'll do that to your own detriment, which is exactly what happened with these people and their fibromyalgia experience. Now, I can only speak for these people. So while we want to take each person's individual story and allow it to bring awareness to what we understand about a condition, we've got to be really careful not to say, well, this is the hard and fast. This is exactly what it's going to be for everybody. Because we're not living with that condition. So who are we to absolutely tell everybody that, well, you've had trauma, that's why you've got it. And B, even if the person has had trauma and that's why they've got fibromyalgia, it's not for us as Pilates professionals to be the person to tell them that. Maybe we can offer them to go to somebody else to start to explore those options, or invite them to listen to a podcast and listen to somebody else's story. Maybe that story resonates with them in a way that then they can start to open up doors in their own life experience to start to help themselves. But we do have to be very, very careful the way that we discuss this with other clients. Um, and the people that shared these stories on the podcast, kudos to them, right? I mean, who wants to stand up and really be vulnerable in today's world when everything is geared towards filters, perfectionism, success, everything, living our best life. And here are these brave people standing up and saying, you know, I was so unhappy. I was so stressed. I was so traumatized that it made my body sick. That's a very, very big thing for these people to do. And I think that we need to honor that as community. And I feel very honored and grateful for people being able to show up here with their vulnerabilities so that we can better understand how to serve other people that might have fibromyalgia. I do think that these conversations are not only powerful, they are a way for us to appreciate not only the vulnerability of people, but also the power of people, the power of self-healing. Um, without sounding woo-woo, I am somebody who believes that I as an individual has the capacity to heal from anything. I know that's a big say, but that's just what I believe of the body. I think that it's a reminder that while the medical fraternity can play a role in some people's lives for giving them the support that they're looking for, it doesn't always hold all the answers. And I love that each of these people had the courage to go and find their own way and now are sharing that way with other people, because ultimately there is no one box fits all. We are all such unique individuals with very unique, very personal, and very, very powerful stories that, if anything, as a Pilates professional, we are privy to the lives of people, and the stories that I listen to on these podcasts are no different to the stories that I hear from clients in the studio. This is just a way for us to be sharing it online so then we can learn together. But if you take time in the studio to really get to know why your clients are coming to you, I can promise you they are not coming to you for Pilates. They're not coming to you to get on a reformer. They're not coming to you for feet in straps. They're coming to you because you give them a sense of belonging, of holding space, of being open. Pilates is all about staying curious, exploration, and constantly learning from the body in front of us. And I think that's where Pilates can be so beneficial for people who are living with chronic conditions like fibromyalgia. So that's all I've got for you. Just a little bit of a wind down from such a fascinating topic. I'm a little bit excited to be bringing you these whole series of episodes this year. I cannot tell you what is the next topic. You'll have to stay tuned and stay listening. Be sure to be following us on Instagram on the Pilates Lounge Podcast and the Pilates Professional, as well as our YouTube channel, Katie Crane, the Pilates Professional, and check out the website, thepilatesprofessional.com.au. We've got a whole host of really great learning tools for you to continue learning. Thank you for joining me. My name's Katie Crane. I am the Pilates Professional, and this is the Pilates Lounge Podcast. I'll be speaking to you very soon.